Originals, How Non-Conformists Move the World, by Adam Grant. Introduction. I want you to picture 4 students, buried in college debt. One of them is wearing a pair of glasses held together with a paperclip. He's had them for 5 years. His prescription has changed twice, but the thought of paying for a new pair is just too much. So, one evening, these 4 friends get an idea. A wild idea. They've seen how a company called Zappos changed the way people buy shoes, selling them online. And they wonder, could we do the same thing for eyeglasses? When they mention it to their friends, the reaction is brutal. No one will ever buy glasses online, they're told, again and again. You have to try them on first. The criticism is scorching. If this were a good idea, one friend says, someone would have already done it. To make matters worse, none of them have any experience in e-commerce, or retail, or fashion. And the industry they want to disrupt is controlled by a single 800-pound gorilla named Luxottica, a company that owns over 80% of the market. Toppling a giant like that seems impossible. And yet, they do it anyway. They walk away from lucrative job offers to launch a company called Warby Parker. Their goal? Sell $500 glasses for just $95 online. They expected to sell maybe a pair or 2 a day. Instead, they hit their entire first-year sales target in less than a month. They were so overwhelmed they had to put 20,000 customers on a waiting list. Just 5 years later, Fast Company magazine named Warby Parker the most innovative company in the world. They beat out giants like Google, Nike, and Apple. The story of Warby Parker seems like a classic tale of fearless entrepreneurs betting it all on a radical idea. It's the kind of story that makes the rest of us feel, well, a little ordinary. We think of people who changed the world, the Steve Jobs, the Martin Luther Kings, the Elon Musks, and we assume they're cut from a different cloth. That they're fearless, endlessly confident, born to be rebels. But what if that story is a myth? In his brilliant book, Originals, organizational psychologist and best-selling author Adam Grant pulls back the curtain on what it truly means to be a nonconformist. For years, he has studied the world's most creative and influential people, and what he's discovered is both shocking and deeply encouraging. Today, we're going to explore that discovery. We're going to unravel the secrets of how ordinary people become originals. And by the end of our time together, I promise you, you'll see that the path to changing the world isn't reserved for daredevils and geniuses. It's a path that's open to anyone who is willing to question the world as it is, and dare to imagine what it could be. And it starts not with a leap of faith, but with a much smaller, quieter step. Book summary. Let's go back to those 4 students who founded Warby Parker. From the outside, their story is the classic hero's journey. They saw a problem, had a brilliant idea, and risked everything to make it a reality. But that's not what happened. Adam Grant himself had the chance to invest in Warby Parker in its earliest days. One of the founders, a student in his class, pitched him the idea. And Grant said no. It was, he admits, the worst financial decision of his life. But why did he turn it down? Because the founders weren't acting like the risk-taking entrepreneurs we see in movies. They were hedging their bets. When Grant asked them if they were dropping out of school to focus on the company full-time, they said no. They wanted to finish their degrees. In fact, 3 of the 4 founders had taken summer internships at other companies, just in case Warby Parker failed. Even as they prepared to graduate, 2 of them had already accepted full-time jobs as a backup plan. To Grant, this seemed like a fatal lack of commitment. They didn't have enough skin in the game. But what he later discovered was that this caution wasn't a weakness. It was their secret weapon. This is the first and perhaps most important myth that the book Originals dismantles, the idea that originality requires reckless risk-taking. We celebrate people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates for dropping out of school to start their companies. But we forget that Bill Gates waited an entire year after selling his first software program before leaving Harvard. And even then, he didn't drop out. He took a formal leave of absence, with his parents ready to bankroll him if things went south. Steve Wozniak, the engineering genius behind the first Apple computer, refused to leave his comfortable job at Hewlett-Packard. It took Steve Jobs and several friends to finally convince him to go all in on Apple. Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, started by selling running shoes out of the trunk of his car in 1964, but he kept his day job as an accountant until 1969. These originals weren't gamblers, they were risk managers. They understood what psychologist Clyde Coombs called a risk portfolio. Just like in the stock market, if you make a risky investment in one area, you balance it by being safe in others. By keeping their day jobs, these entrepreneurs had a safety net. It gave them a sense of security that freed them up to be truly original in their ventures. They weren't pressured to launch a half-baked idea just to pay the bills. They could wait, tinker, and refine until their creation was truly ready. In a landmark study that tracked over 5,000 American entrepreneurs, the results were stunning. The entrepreneurs who quit their day jobs to start their companies were far more confident and bigger risk takers. But the ones who hedged their bets, starting their companies while still employed, had 33% lower odds of failure. It turns out, the people who move the world forward aren't the daredevils who leap before they look. They're the ones who tiptoe to the edge of the cliff, calculate the distance to the ground, triple-check their parachute, and set up a safety net at the bottom just in case. This cautious approach begins long before an idea is even born. It starts with questioning the world around us. So many of us live in what Grant calls an Internet Explorer world. When you get a new PC, Internet Explorer is the default browser. If you get a Mac, it's Safari. The majority of people never question this default. They just use what's given to them. But some people take the initiative to download a different browser, like Chrome or Firefox. It's a small act, but it's a powerful signal. In one study of over 30,000 customer service agents, economist Michael Hausman found that employees who used Chrome or Firefox stayed in their jobs 15% longer than those who used Internet Explorer or Safari. They were also 19% less likely to miss work and had significantly higher sales and customer satisfaction ratings. It wasn't the browser itself that made the difference. It was what the choice of browser revealed about their mindset. The people who accepted the default browser also accepted the defaults in their jobs. They followed the scripts. When they were unhappy, they just quit. But the ones who took the initiative to change their browser also took the initiative to change their jobs. They found new ways to solve customer problems. When they encountered a situation they didn't like, they fixed it. They rejected the default. The hallmark of originality is rejecting the default and exploring if a better option exists. This starts with a sense of curiosity, what Grant calls vuja, the opposite of déjà vu. Déjà vu is when you encounter something new, but it feels familiar. Vuja is when you face something familiar, but you see it with a fresh perspective. This is what happened to the Warby Parker founders. For years, they had accepted that glasses were ridiculously expensive. It was the default. But one night, one of the founders, Dave Gilboa, found himself comparing the price of his simple glasses to his complex new iPhone. And for the first time, he asked, why? Why did a simple product that had barely changed in a century cost more than a powerful smartphone? That simple question led them down a rabbit hole. They discovered the industry was dominated by a single company, Luxottica, that was charging a 20x markup. The default wasn't legitimate, it was a choice made by a company. And that meant they could make a different choice. But once you have an idea, how do you know if it's any good? This brings us to one of the biggest barriers to originality, Not idea generation, but idea selection. Let me tell you two stories. At the turn of the century, a brilliant inventor named Dean Kamen created a self-balancing personal transporter. Steve Jobs called it the most amazing technology he'd seen since the personal computer and offered to advise Kamen for free. A legendary investor pumped $80 million into it, predicting it would be bigger than the internet. The product was the Segway. And it was one of the biggest tech flops of the decade. A false positive. Around the same time, two comedians created a TV show pilot. Network executives didn't get it. An audience test was a disaster. Viewers called the main character a loser. The summary report concluded, no segment of the audience was eager to watch the show again. That show was Seinfeld, which would go on to be named by TV Guide as the greatest television program of all time. A false negative. Why do we get it so wrong? Grant reveals that creators themselves are terrible judges of their own ideas. We're too close to them. We fall in love with our own creations and are blinded by overconfidence. Even geniuses struggle with this. Beethoven's favorite symphonies weren't the ones that became his most famous. Picasso, while painting his masterpiece Guernica, produced 79 different drawings, often returning to his earliest sketches after going down blind alleys. So if creators can't be trusted, what's the secret to producing a masterpiece? The answer is surprisingly simple. You produce a huge volume of work. Creative geniuses aren't qualitatively better than their peers. They are simply more prolific. Shakespeare, in 2 decades, produced 37 plays and 154 sonnets. For every Macbeth or King Lear, there was an All's Well that ends well. Mozart composed more than 600 pieces. Beethoven, 650. Bach, over 1,000. To get a handful of masterworks, they had to produce an enormous quantity of work. The same is true for Thomas Edison, who held 1,093 patents. We remember him for the light bulb and the phonograph, but we forget his patents for a creepy talking doll and a method for preserving fruit. Quantity is the most predictable path to quality. Many people fail to be original because they generate a few ideas and then obsess over perfecting them. But our first ideas are often the most conventional. It's only after we've exhausted the obvious that we start thinking outside the box. As the team at the viral content company Upworthy says, you need to generate at least 25 headlines for every article. The first 24 will be terrible. But the 25th will be a gift from the headline gods. So, you've managed your risk, and you've generated a flood of ideas. How do you champion the best ones without getting shut down? This is where the story of originality takes another counterintuitive turn. Imagine you have a radical idea that you need to pitch to your boss or to a group of investors. Most of us would lead with passion and confidence, highlighting all the reasons our idea is brilliant. But Rufus Griscom did the exact opposite. When he pitched his parenting media company, Bobble, to venture capitalists, he presented a slide titled, "The Top 5 Reasons Not to Invest in This Business." It was a crazy move. He was hand-delivering reasons for them to say no. And it worked. He raised over $3 million. 2 years later, when he pitched Disney on acquiring the company, he did it again. He showed a slide that said, "Here's why you should not buy Babbel." Disney bought the company for $40 million. This is what Grant calls the Sorek effect. When you're trying to persuade a skeptical audience, leading with your weaknesses is surprisingly effective. Why? First, it disarms them. When people know you're trying to persuade them, their shields go up. Unbridled optimism feels like salesmanship. But when you lead with the downsides, you come across as honest and trustworthy. It signals that you're smart enough to have anticipated the potential problems. As Rufus Griscom says, if I'm willing to tell them what's wrong with my business, they think there must be an awful lot that's right with it. Second, It makes you seem smarter. In one study, book reviewers who wrote scathing, critical reviews were rated as more intelligent than those who wrote glowing, positive ones, even when the content was identical. We assume an amateur can appreciate something, but it takes a professional to critique it. This powerless form of communication is crucial when you're speaking truth to power. This was a lesson Carmen Medina had to learn the hard way. In the 1990s, Medina was a CIA analyst with a revolutionary idea. The agency shared intelligence through finished reports, basically a daily newspaper. It was slow and siloed. She proposed creating a real-time, online platform where agencies could share information instantly. Her colleagues shot it down immediately. The internet was a security threat, they argued. It was too radical. The more she pushed, the more she was isolated. Her career was ruined. But years later, she succeeded. After the September 11th attacks, the need for better interagency communication was painfully obvious. But Medina also learned how to champion her idea differently. Instead of just trying to exercise power from below, she focused on earning status first. She took a job in information security, a conservative role that gave her top cover. From that position of trust, she could frame her radical idea not as a threat, but as a way to enhance security. She had earned what psychologist Edwin Hollander calls idiosyncrasy credits, the latitude to deviate from the group's expectations because you've proven your worth. Once you have an idea and a strategy to voice it, another hidden force comes into play: timing. We're always told, the early bird gets the worm, but Grant reminds us that the second mouse gets the cheese. In business, we're obsessed with the first mover advantage, but a massive study of hundreds of brands found a shocking reality. The failure rate for pioneers was 47%. For settlers, companies that entered the market later, it was only 8%. Pioneers have to make all the mistakes themselves. They face an undeveloped market and uncertain consumer tastes. Settlers can watch, learn from the pioneers' errors, and then enter the market with a superior product. Facebook wasn't the first social network. It came after MySpace and Friendster. Google wasn't the first search engine. It followed Alta Vista and Yahoo. Being original doesn't require being first. It requires being different and better. This brings us to one of the most beautiful and human ideas in the book: the power of strategic procrastination. Think of the most famous speech of the 20th century, Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. The March on Washington had been planned for months. King knew the stakes were monumental. You would think he would have had his speech written weeks in advance. But he didn't start writing it until after 10 p.m. the night before. He was up all night, bone-weary and exhausted. This wasn't a flaw. It was a feature of his creative process. By procrastinating, King gave himself time to consider a wider range of ideas. He kept his options open. The night before the march, he was still gathering ideas from his advisors. He was engaging in divergent thinking, exploring possibilities rather than settling on one. But the most incredible part of the story is what happened during the speech itself. The famous refrain, "I have a dream," was not in his prepared notes. He was 11 minutes into the speech when the gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, who was sitting behind him, shouted, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." King heard her. He pushed his written script aside, and, in front of a live crowd of 250,000 people, he improvised. He winged it. Because he hadn't obsessively rehearsed a rigid script, he was open to the magic of the moment. Procrastination didn't just give him time to incubate better ideas, it left him flexible enough to improvise one of the most powerful moments in history. This isn't an anomaly. Leonardo da Vinci was a notorious procrastinator. He worked on the Mona Lisa on and off for years, not completing it until just before his death. His contemporaries thought he was wasting time. But his distractions, his studies of optics and light, were what enabled his masterpieces. Procrastination can be a resource for creativity. So, are some people just born with this rebellious, creative spirit? Here's where the story gets really interesting. Adam Grant takes us to the baseball diamond. Think of the riskiest play in baseball, stealing a base. It's an act of rebellion against the default, staying put. Now, think of the riskiest steal of all, stealing home plate. The player who holds the modern record for stealing home is Jackie Robinson, the same man who had the courage to break baseball's color barrier. Robinson was a born rebel. And a fascinating clue to his rebellious nature lies in his family. He was the youngest of 5 children. This isn't a coincidence. Frank Sulloway, a historian of science, analyzed thousands of scientists across major scientific revolutions, from Copernicus to Darwin to Einstein. He found that latter-borns were dramatically more likely to champion radical new ideas than their firstborn siblings. Latter-born scientists were more than 5 times as likely as firstborns to support Copernicus's revolutionary model of the solar system. Why? Firstborns tend to identify with their parents and with authority. They are the responsible achievers. When a younger sibling comes along, they have to find a different way to stand out. They can't compete on size or strength, so they compete by being different. They become the rebels, the risk-takers, the comedians. When Grant analyzed Comedy Central's list of the 100 greatest stand-up comics, he found that nearly half of them were the last-born child in their family. Stephen Colbert is the youngest of 11. Chelsea Handler, the youngest of 6. Jim Gaffigan, the youngest of 6. But this isn't just about birth order. It's about parenting. Parents tend to be stricter with their firstborns. By the time the younger ones come around, they're more relaxed, more experienced, and more exhausted. Latter-borns often get more freedom to experiment and take risks. Crucially, though, it's not just about giving children freedom. It's about how you guide that freedom. A groundbreaking study compared people who risked their lives to rescue Jews during the Holocaust with bystanders who did not. The biggest difference wasn't their education or religion, it was how their parents disciplined them. The parents of rescuers relied on reasoning. When their children misbehaved, they didn't just enforce rules, they explained the principles behind them. And most importantly, they explained the consequences of their actions for others. This fosters empathy and guilt, which guide children toward moral rebellion, not destructive rebellion. This also relates to how we praise children. We tend to praise the action, that was a nice thing to do. But research shows it's far more powerful to praise the character. You are a nice and helpful person. When we do this, children begin to internalize morality as part of their identity. Instead of asking, "Can I get away with this?" they ask, "What kind of person am I?" This brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. How do you build an entire organization of originals? A place where dissent isn't just tolerated, but encouraged? For this, Grant takes us inside one of the most successful and unusual companies in the world, the hedge fund Bridgewater Associates, founded by billionaire Ray Dalio. At Bridgewater, there is a culture of what Dalio calls radical transparency. Every meeting is recorded. Every employee has a believability score, like a baseball card, showing their track record in different areas. And everyone, from the newest hire to the CEO, is expected to challenge ideas openly and honestly. One junior employee sent an email to Ray Dalio after a client meeting, grading his performance AD. He told Dalio he was disorganized, unprepared, and rambled. At any other company, this would be career suicide. At Bridgewater, Dalio forwarded the email to his leadership team and asked them to grade him as well. The entire exchange was then shared with the company so everyone could learn from it. At Bridgewater, you can be fired for not speaking up. It's a culture where the commitment is to dissent. Dalio has created an idea meritocracy, where the best ideas win, regardless of who they come from. To do this, they've learned a critical lesson about dissent. Most companies, when they want to avoid groupthink, will appoint a devil's advocate, but this doesn't work. When someone is just playing a role, we don't take them seriously. Authentic dissent is far more powerful. So Bridgewater doesn't assign devil's advocates, it unearths them. They find people who genuinely disagree and give them a platform. This is the ultimate lesson of originals. Being an original isn't a fixed trait. It is a free choice. It's not about being the most brilliant or the most fearless person in the room. It's about having the courage to reject the default, the curiosity to explore alternatives, and the resilience to keep pushing when the world pushes back. The people who change the world, Adam Grant shows us, feel the same fear and the same doubt as the rest of us. What sets them apart is that they know that failing is not as painful as failing to try. They take action anyway. And in doing so, they don't just move the world forward. They give the rest of us permission to do the same. Commentary. As we wrap up our journey through Adam Grant's originals, I want to take a moment to reflect on what I believe is the book's most powerful and liberating message. For so long, we've been fed a myth about innovation and creativity. It's the myth of the lone genius, the reckless visionary, the person who is just fundamentally different from the rest of us. It's an inspiring story, but it's also a deeply disempowering one. It puts originality on a pedestal, making it seem like a gift bestowed upon a chosen few. What Adam Grant does so masterfully is to shatter that pedestal. He brings originality back down to earth and shows us that it's not a magical trait you're born with, but a set of skills and mindsets that anyone can cultivate. The most profound lesson, for me, is the idea that the most successful originals are not the biggest risk takers, but the best risk mitigators. Think about that for a moment. The entrepreneurs who kept their day jobs, the activists who built safety nets, they weren't being cowardly, they were being smart. They were creating the psychological freedom necessary to pursue bold ideas. This reframes failure not as a sign of weakness, but as a manageable part of the creative process. It gives us permission to be cautious, to test our ideas, to build a balanced life while still reaching for something extraordinary. This is incredibly relevant for you right now, at this stage of your life. The world might be telling you that you need to have a grand plan, to bet everything on a single passion. But this book says the opposite. It says it's okay to have a backup plan. It's okay to procrastinate on the big questions. It's okay to explore different interests and build a portfolio of skills, because that breadth of experience is what fuels creative breakthroughs later on. Your uncertainty is not a liability, it's a creative asset. So, how can you start putting these ideas into practice today? Let me offer 3 simple actions. First, question 1 default this week. It could be anything. Why do classes at your school start at that specific time? Why does your family always eat a certain meal on a certain night? You don't have to have a solution. The goal is simply to get into the habit of looking at the familiar world with fresh eyes, to practice the art of vuja. Second, triple your idea output for one project. The next time you have to write an essay, design a poster, or solve a problem, don't stop at your first idea. Force yourself to generate at least 10 different options, even if some of them seem silly. Remember, quantity is the path to quality. You have to kiss a lot of frogs to find a prince. And third, find your first follower. The next time you have an idea that you're hesitant to share, don't try to convince a whole group. Just find one person, a trusted friend, a supportive teacher, and share it with them. As the book shows, having just a single ally can dramatically boost our courage to speak up. It transforms you from a lone nut into a leader. That was a summary of originals, How Non-Conformists Move the World by Adam Grant. We've explored the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found when you make the journey yourself. The true magic of a book like this happens in the quiet moments of reading, when a particular story connects with your own experience, or a simple phrase sparks an idea you never saw coming. This summary is your guide to decide if this book deserves your time. If anything we've talked about has resonated with you, if you felt a spark of recognition or a flicker of curiosity, then I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see your own potential to make a difference. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's a small click for you, but it means the world to us, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep growing and learning together.